heard that come through. That sounds pretty good too. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Lightfoot Effects. Now in the last video I released, I did a full demonstration of my current pedal board, and a lot of you have privately messaged me or posted in the chats that you wanted to know how I set up my Tonex, how I'm running the Tonex. So this video is going to be all about the Tonex. What we'll do is we'll go through how I would set up a preset on the Tonex and how I would EQ it for playing in a live situation. I'll go through how I set up tones with this. We'll then put it on my pedal board, and then even more towards the end, we'll run two of these. I'll show you how I run two of them in stereo. If you're playing in mono, we're just gonna set up one, and then we'll set up a second one for stereo, and I'll show how I go through my process of setting up my amps. A little about the guitar I'm playing. I will be playing the Elliott 357 with gold foil pickups. Super awesome guitar, super versatile, has great clarity. That's it, let's jump into it. From Tone Factor, this is their free AC30 capture, so you guys can get this for free off their website. We'll go ahead and set this up. I'm gonna put this on my pedal board because I actually think the best way to set these up is with your pedal board, not by itself, because you want to take account for cable impedance, things like buffers, different pedals. They will change your tone. Even if your tone is like pristine, just adding lengths of cable will make it sound drastically different. So if I were to dial this in right now just by itself and then put it on my pedal board, it'll sound different. It'll either be like, there'll either be highs cut or maybe highs added, just depending on buffers and whatnot. So I recommend putting it on your pedal board and then dialing it in with your full chain. So that's what we're gonna do with this. So we'll jump to that part now. Here's the board. I got the pedal on there. This is the last in the chain, and then you'll see another Tonex right next to that, which I have totally off. So we're only gonna hear the one. So here's how it sounds right out of the box. So what I have on is my compressor. I have a Cali 76. I have it set already how I would normally run it. So the Cali 76 is the only thing I want on. Whenever I am dialing in an amp sound, I like the compressor on. If it's a pedal, that's always gonna be on. Even if it's a drive, I recommend leaving it on when you dial the amp in. Otherwise, what if you get the amp sounding amazing and then you turn the drive on or the compressor on that you always use and then it sounds terrible? So I think it's easier to, instead of redialing in the compressor to sound good with the amp, I just set the compressor up how I normally run it, or I've set it up a lot before, so I kind of know where I like it, and then I set up the amp once the compressor's dialed in. So hopefully that makes sense. So going out from the Tonex, I am running it into the Goodwood Audio long line. Something similar would be like the Walrus Canvas or the Daiso Plus, or even a DI, a stereo DI if you're gonna do two Tonexes. Right now the long line's hooked up to the board. The reason I have the long line is it has a phase button, and that becomes very important usually when you're running two amps if they're not in phase. The unfortunate thing with the Canvas is it doesn't have a phase swap. Walrus Audio, if you're watching this, please re-release this with a phase swap, because I love the size and it's a cool looking pedal. I really just think it's missing a phase button, especially if it's stereo for people running two amps. Anyways, love your products. The Goodwood Audio long line has a phase button, and that will be important to this. We'll forget that for now though, because we're setting it up mono. Let's get into it. One thing to let you guys know about is we're gonna want to hold this button right here to go into the global settings, and then we're gonna scroll it over to global settings and then click it, and then go into the trim input. So a lot of people argue over the trim input. I think by default now it comes at 0, but it used to be at +8. This just controls the amount of pre-gain that you want to put on your guitar. I like the approach of leaving it at the 0, at the +0, and then I throw in the gain that I want through the amp. So Some of you may have yours set to 8, and that's fine. Just know that is boosting your natural guitar sound. So your guitar is being boosted +8 than its normal sound. A guy named Jason Sadites, I think, or Saditz, has done a great video on this, and he talks a lot about the differences and how Tonex was boosting guitars with the +8. They were actually, it had a built-in boost, and that's what that was doing. And so it makes more sense to have it at 0. That's what they did with their new firmware. And that makes it so every guitar that you put on here can have its character, have its voice come through. You know, I don't want all my guitars to be boosted and then going into amps. I want them all to sound at the appropriate output level that they need to sound. You know, if I have a Strat in, I want it to be weaker and smaller than my Telly. So the input trim is designed to get all your guitars sounding in the same range. See, like right now it says mine's too low. It would want me to go much higher to get to okay. I'm just gonna leave it at 0 because that's where they leave it at the factory anyways, and it makes sense to me. But you can change that as you will. To get out of that, I usually will just click one of these and I'll just click back. Okay. So the first thing I like to do is setting these up, turning these knobs all to 5. You'll see this button changes to green. That means that is where the patch was set up at, and that's going to be with any patch you load. It's going to be 5. 5 is going to be your baseline so that you can see where your knobs are. It makes it a lot easier to change them. I want everything to be green. I want to touch every knob until it's green. It should be for this too, 5. So there we go. It's only going to be these 3. This one won't matter right now, and then this won't matter. This is just acting as volume. I leave the volume at 5, and that's just the point where I like to do it. Just so when I'm playing live, I know these should always be right up at 5. So I have a consistent sound across all my presets. We'll do a strum real quick. Sounds great. This is the stock patch though. Remember, I made a second one. I'm gonna jump over to it. It's fine, everything's at 5 and it's green, so I know I don't have to change anything. It's the same amp, I'm just calling it Elliott. So the volume here carries across every patch, no matter what you do. So that's pretty nice. You don't have to do it. This volume parameter is different. This one is the one that saves it per preset. So this is the volume if you want it to be louder on one and then you want to be like quieter on the other. See, the volume on here is at it's at 5. Then if I go here, it's at 5, but I can like go to 6 and then I could save it and it'll save. Right now we're not going to worry about that. Well, we will in a minute. So here we go on Elliott. Everything's at 5. This is how I like to go about dialing in a sound. So I want to get the volume where I normally like it first. I'm going to bring this knob up more. I'm using my DAW. I have a meter and it's showing me where I like it. I like my sound to be around -9. That's right where it starts hitting the yellow on my Apollo. So I'm gonna make it a little louder. I want it to hit 9. When I strum hard, I want it to hit 9. So let's go a little louder. That's great. Now, if you want to do a quick save, you just tap these 2 buttons. Boom, it's saved. So that volume now of 7.8 is always going to be that. So here's the original one, which is at 5. If I go back to this one now, you'll see it's still at, 7.8. So that's how you can save volume per patch. That's how I make all my guitars the same level, no matter which patch I load. I'm always going to get the same gain. So this patch sounds pretty darn good out of the box. It's a Greenback AC30. This is the driven one. I want it to be a little less gain though. I feel like that might be just a tad too driven for my taste. I want it to be where when I play light, it's pretty soft. And then drive when I'm, play harder. It could go a little down, I feel like. This was a driven patch, so ideally we'd want to turn the gain a bit down. Whenever the gain comes down, the volume must come up because it makes the amp quieter. I'd probably go a little higher, maybe around 4.4. It sounds great to me. I'm going to test it with some drives. So I'm going to turn on my King of Tone gain stage 1. Then I want to see how it sounds with the red side, the medium stage gain. Sounds great. Now let's mess with the bass. I wanted a little more bass. You can mess with that. A trick that I've always liked is if you do a strum and you twist the knobs, you can hear the frequency change. Right there is where the bass is really coming in. I'm hearing it right there in my room. It's a nice little bit of a low end. I might roll it back just a bit so it's not overpowering. And then from there, we'll do the same thing with the mids. I want to hear where that's prominently coming out. It's right around here, almost at about 5. It's almost perfect. It could probably come up a little bit. I'm going to play light and hard. Cool. And then for the treble, it sounds pretty good where it's at. I'm just curious. Let's do the same thing. Right here is where it really pokes out. That's too high for me. I like to lean it towards the lower end. I might come down just a bit. Cool, so when I am kind of where I'm liking it, I'll hit these two at the same time to save it. I may want just a tad more gain, maybe 4.5. Check my settings again. And then I'm going to save. All right, so we have a few other options. If you want more tweakability, we can hold down this button. And now we're in alt mode. So now we can set the settings on the bottom row. To be honest, I never touch reverb. I never touch compression. I never touch noise gate. I've never been a noise gate guy because it cuts my delays and my reverbs. But if you don't like guitar noise, you can use that. I mainly go with presence and depth. By default, these are also at 5, so I need to move them to 5 to be where they are stock. And there we go. So they're both at 5. So presence is your extra top end. A depth is an even more bassy end, a lower end. I usually don't need to touch depth unless I really need low end. I usually leave it stock on most captures, but here's kind of a way you can, here's how it sounds. It does add an awesome feeling and it feels big and full, but when you play live, this is the kind of frequency that the sound guy is going to cut. So I don't even tempt myself with it. I know if I'm boosting this, he's just going to cut it because it's going to start getting into bass guitar territory. It does sound good though in a bedroom, but I just know better not to do that. But that's there if you want. I usually will leave that unless I just am playing a really tinny super bright amp, this would be a great, it's like an extra low end, think of it that way. Lower than your bass. Presence does help. I do usually tweak that. Usually it's, depending on the amp, it could be too bright or too mellow. If you go up, here I'll play, here's how it sounds. See, it brought out that top end, so now it starts to sound more like an AC30 with like blue backs maybe. I am a fan of the darker stuff, so I will usually leave it at 5, and if anything, I will usually bring it down. I'm going to put on some overdrives. Here's the kilt. Back to the cleans. I might leave it right around there. It barely needs to come down. It could probably even stay at 5. I feel like that, it might seem a little bright, but it's really, we're just splitting hairs. Just for fun, I'll leave it a little darker, just so we can say we tweaked more. But this patch comes out pretty darn good right out of the box. I've barely tweaked anything. I'm gonna do my final save. I'm just gonna check my gain structure on my computer. Yeah, when I hit hard, it's hitting -9, barely. I might bring it up just a tad bit more. Boom. And so I'm always gonna leave the volume right there at noon. Like I said, you don't have to. You could just, maybe you wanna always leave yours at 8, and maybe that's where you want it, and that's always gonna give you more volume. For me, it just happens to be 5. I just have that as my standard set, so I know everything should be 5 on volume. And then this is my save. So that sounds pretty darn good to me. We can try it out with some like delay and reverb. And then maybe I want, you know, something bigger in the lead section. And then when it's clean, it still sounds nice and clean. But then, you know, I can drive it. That's it for mono. I don't know how those wet effects were gonna sound, because my whole board's set up for stereo, and I was literally just going out one side. So let's set up the other one for stereo, and we'll see how that sounds. But yeah, you mono guys, right there, I think it would be perfect. Like I said, I have it set, usually my amps, I just want them set to be pretty, if I play lightly, it's pretty clean. And then this is with all my overdrives are off. The only thing that's on is the compressor. If I play hard, it gets distorted a little bit, on the edge of breakup. And then I got a lot of clean on the neck still. So for the stereo, what we'll do is we'll get the pedal board back on the floor, so you can see the whole shot. And I'm gonna load up the same tone factor, but I'm gonna put the Prosonic on the other one. That's just usually how I run it. But so yeah, so the key takeaways with how I like to dial in those amps is I want the low end, the mids, and the high to pretty much be as equal as they sound when dialing them in. That's just a good starting point. The guy who captured them, David Hislop from Tone Factor, he has them pretty EQ'd very well already. A lot of you guys might say they sound dark out of the box, and they definitely do, I think. But I think darker amps are better when you're playing live through modeling, because as they turn your volume up, they actually get brighter. If I have this in my studio here, like the louder I turn that volume knob, the more harsh the highs come out and the brighter they get. That's why I run it right where it's touching the yellow, and then I kind of run it pretty loud in my room as if I were playing somewhere loud, and then that kind of gives me an idea when they're playing me into a loud system. It comes out it comes out right around where it needs to be. So, in my opinion, I feel like the brighter patches for guitar stuff can be like too bright when you go play in a big church or a big venue. If you're at a small venue, they're probably going to come out just fine. So it really depends on where you're playing, and you may need to change it a few times. This is just kind of where I've gotten used to, and I've played around enough to know that usually hits the sweet spot, and I can make a few changes on the fly. So now that we have this amp dialed in, I'm going to go ahead and turn it down, and I'm going to bring up just the other one to 5. So for this amp, I went ahead and just loaded on the Fender Prosonic driven profile from Tone Factor. We'll switch everything to 5. Cool, so that's stock. So let's see how that sounds. For me, that's a little too driven right away, so I'm going to bring that down a bit. That sounds pretty good. So let's do the bass test. Right around here is when the low end starts just popping out a little bit. So I'm gonna go off that just a tad. I like to go right before that point. Then let's check the mids. The mids start poking out here around there in my system. When dialing in live guitar tone, mids are your friend. Not too much, but just enough, because that's the instrument, that's the frequency that you sit in. So I usually try and get good mids, but like not a ton, not like aggressively. So those sound like they could maybe come down a tiny bit. And then the treble, it actually sounds pretty good where it's at. It sounds pretty dark already and not too like harsh. Now with this amp, I already know that the presence is set to 5 and the depth is 5, and I already know it does not need more depth because it's already a super bass heavy amp, and it maybe could use more presence. We'll try the neck. First of all, what I forgot to do was turn it up so it's loud, just like the other amp. I'm wanting to see if it's on -9. That needs to go up more. Maybe just a tad more. I'm going to try the neck. Let's try it with the King of Tone, lowest gain. King of Tone with the red side. Sounds a little muddy, so let's check the bass. They need to just come down a little bit. If you take bass out, it can add clarity. But then it loses some of its power. So it might need to add some back a little bit. Yeah, we'll try it back around where it was. So being that this is in stereo, I want to get both amps to sound similar. So I want to hear how my AC30 sounds and if it's matching that side. So I'm going to switch it up to 5 because they both are going to be at 5, and I have them both set to -9 on my interface, so I know their levels are going to be the same. So let's see how they sound together. So what I will do when I'm running stereo is I got one on each speaker. I'm going to turn, I want to hear how the AC30 sounds by itself. Now I want to hear the Fender Prosonic. So the Fender's it's set up to be a lot lower. So I might try and, so I either need to make the AC30 match that, or I need to make that match the AC30, because I want them to have very similar soundscapes. The Fender Prosonic's a little too dark, so yeah, I am gonna roll the bass down. And I'm going to bring back the AC30 again and compare them. So that's the AC30. Let's hear the Fender again. I also want to make sure the gains are similar, so like they both have the similar amount of gain. Which they do. This just needs like some more mids or something. And then maybe a little more treble. This is a situation where I might actually turn up the presence to get some of that extra top end back. So we'll just bring it up to maybe 5.6 and see how that sounds. That sounds great. That did the trick. It could probably come down a few, like 5.4. I think I liked it at 5.6. Now that we brought up presence, I can bring the treble down, so it's not just, I'm just trying to balance treble between presence. Let's bring more treble into there. So that's going to be different depending on every guitar. This is a darker guitar in my opinion, these gold foils. If I had like a Tele or a Strat, I'd probably be turning a lot of the treble and the presence down and boosting the bass a lot more to make up for that guitar. So let's see how this compares again to the AC30. So here's the Fender. And here's the AC30. Let's hear them together. So the AC30 feels like it might need a little more low end, just to balance it to match the Fender. And then maybe a little more high end. Now let's match them. Those sound pretty close to me. I would then try it with drive. So my first stage is the King of Tone. And then maybe the King of Tone red side. And then the kilt. So then, you know, reverb and delay. I think those are great starting sounds. I could go more in depth and really get them tweaking, but the goal is to just kind of get them sounding the same. And then from there I could like lower, you know, if they're too bright, which they might be a little bit, I could like increase the low end on the Prosonic maybe to give it some more bottom end with their mixed together. So you heard that come through. That sounds pretty good too. So there's different ways to, you know, trial and error between the two of them. And then you can always leave, you know, you remember you got your tone knob too. So if that's too bright, or like if I felt like that was maybe too much for I was playing, I might just bring the tone down a little. So yeah, that's the Tonex. That's about how I would dial them in for every guitar. I would just follow those principles of just trying to get an equal low end, equal mids, and equal treble, and then playing it at a significantly, somewhat loud volume, or use good headphones. I use the Yamaha HS7s. I'm running into the Apollo X4 just so I can get the extra channels, but the twin is great. Oh, and then yeah, the last thing I was gonna say is the phase. You want to make sure you have some way to put the amps in phase. So I'll show you an example of how they sound out of phase. So I have just set my amps out of phase. You'll hear what a difference that makes. We were in phase, we were set right the whole time, but if you don't have some way to swap the phase, this is how it would sound. It's like lopsided. One side sounds hollow, and the other side sounds full. That's what it sounds like. So that's why I have the Goodwood Audio long line. Like I said, if you have the Daiso Plus, it can also swap the phase. Walrus Canvas can't. And then I think the Radial stereo DIs, they don't have a phase swap either. You can have a guy at your soundboard do it, or you can do it in your DAW if you're recording. So I'll put it back in phase. It's this little button that I have to switch on the bottom of the board. Now we're back in phase. So that's how phase sounds when it's not set appropriately. So whenever you're running 2 amps, especially if it's like a Vox and a Fender, usually they can be out of phase, and you'll need to correct that by flipping one of them. Anyways, everyone, thanks for tuning in. That concludes the Tonex video. That's what I'm currently running right now. This was kind of my Tonex review / how I run things, and to answer any questions you guys have. I'm hoping to get some more pedals to review soon, and then some other fun things coming. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.